Climate change in Saudi Arabia. In this first section, let's look at the scientific evidence showing how Saudi Arabia's climate has changed over the past decades. You can see the message on the screen that says 1.6, that's how much hotter Saudi Arabia is compared to the 1960s. This figure summarizes a century of recorded warming across the kingdom. According to the World Bank Climate Change Knowledge Portal in 2024 and the Saudi National Center for Meteorology, the national mean temperature has risen between 1.5 and 2 grades since the mid 20th century. This may sound small, but in a desert country like Saudi Arabia, it dramatically intensifies heat stress, drought, and energy demand. The first chart, mean annual temperature in Saudi Arabia 1960 to 2023, illustrates how clear this clear upward trend. The red line shows a continuous rise from around 25 grades in the 1960 to nearly 28 grades today. A steady warming confirmed by both NCM and NOAA in 2024 datasets. What's notable is that nighttime minimum temperatures are climbing faster than the daytime highs, meaning that atmosphere is retaining more heat, a direct symptom of increased greenhouse gases. The next graphic, Saudi CO2 emissions by sector from 1990 to 2024, explains part of the cause. Based on IEA data, total national emissions have grown from under 250 million tons in 1990 to roughly 580 million tons of CO2 in 2024. Power generation and heavy industry account for the large share, while transport and oil and gas operations make up the rest. This growth reflects the country's historical dependence on fossil fuels. Through recent Vision 2030, policies have started to slow the rate of increase through efficiency programs and renewable projects. Finally, look at the third chart, precipitation change and dust storm frequency from 1980 to 2023. The blue line shows how annual rainfall has declined by about 10 to 30% over the last 4 decades, while the orange line shows dust storms days per year tripling, rising from around 20 days in the early 1980s to more than 60 days recently. This data from NCM 2023, NASA MODIS, and Notaro et al. 2013 reveal a clear relationship. Less rainfall means drier soils and more airborne dust, which worsens air quality and reduces visibility. Taken together, these three viral records, temperature, emissions, and precipitation, demonstrate a consistent scientific pattern. Saudi Arabia is warming faster than the global average. Its atmosphere is becoming drier and its industrial emissions remain high. Understanding the evidence is essential not only for assessing environmental risk, but also for shaping effective national adaptation strategies under the Saudi Green Initiative and the broader Vision 2030 framework. As we have seen, the scientific evidence for climate change in Saudi Arabia is strong. Yet, the challenge is not scientific, it's social, political, and economic. This is what experts often call the denial challenge. For decades, Saudi Arabia's position on climate change has been influenced by its unique dependence on oil revenues. The kingdom's economic structure, social welfare, and international power have all been deeply tied to fossil fuels. So, early discussions about climate actions were often perceived as potential threats to national prosperity rather than opportunities for transformation. In the 1990s, during the Rio Earth Summit and the Kyoto Protocol negotiations, Saudi Arabia expressed concerns that rapid decarbonization could destabilize its economy. The official stance emphasized economic diversification and compensation mechanisms for all exporting nations affected by global emission cuts. The defensive stance slowly evolved. By 2015, in its first intended nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, Saudi Arabia pledged to reduce up to 130 million tons of CO2, equivalent annually by 2030, not through limiting oil production, but through energy efficiency and diversification. This marked a subtle but important shift from skepticism towards caution participation. A turning point came with Vision 2030 and the Saudi Green Initiative, launched in 2021. Here, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced a net zero by 2060 goal, alongside committed to reduce 27.8 square meters annually, plant 10 billion trees, and transition 50% of electricity generation to renewables by 2030. This target reframed Saudi Arabia's image from a reluctant participant to an aspiring leader in regional sustainability. However, denial hasn't disappeared, it has simply changed form. Experts refer to this new phase as soft denial. This doesn't reject the science outright, but rather downplays urgency, assuming that technology like carbon capture and hydrogen fuel will solve the crisis without altering consumption patterns. The timeline on screen illustrates this evolution, from cautious skepticism to strategic adaptation, but public opinion data from Pew Research Center and Araf Barometer suggests that only about 46% of Saudi respondents view climate change as a major personal threat, compared to over 70% globally. That means awareness has grown, but personal concern remains low. This gap reflects a deeper cultural reality. Many Saudis see climate change as a global issue managed at the state level, not a local or individual responsibility. It also shows how decades of prosperity tied to oil have shaped the national mindset. The challenge now is to move from acknowledgement to engagement, from seeing climate change as an abstract global problem to treating it as a domestic priority that affects health, agriculture, and long-term economic stability. In short, overcoming denial in Saudi Arabia requires more than policies. It requires changing the narrative, turning scientific facts into collective motivation for sustainable transformation. Now that we have looked at Saudi Arabia's scientific evidence and public perception, let's explore how these changes are actually being felt on the ground through extreme weather events. The visual on this slide summarizes the pattern that has emerged across the kingdom from 2000 to 2024. Less regular rainfall, longer and hotter summers, and more frequent floods and dust storms. Starting on the left panel, we see a geographic map of major extreme events. The blue icons mark floods, the red show heat waves, and the yellow highlight dust storms. The Jeddah floods, especially in 2009, 2011, and again 2022, stand out as some of the most severe natural disasters in the country's history. During the 2022 event, for instance, the National Center for Meteorology reported over 180 millimeters of rain in just 24 hours, more than triple the monthly average. In the south, the Jazan and Nasir regions have faced similar problems, where steep terrain amplifies flash flooding. Meanwhile, in Rija and Daman, the story is heat. Temperatures above 45 degrees are now common during summer, often lasting for weeks. The middle graph provides the statistical picture. The blue bars represent annual rainfall, which has gradually declined since 2000. At the same time, the orange line shows the number of extreme weather events, flood, heat waves, and dust storms, which have rapidly increased. What this means is that even though the total amount of rain has decreased, when it does fall, it is much more intense and destructive. The soil can't absorb the water quickly enough, so it floods instead of replenishing groundwater. The data from the World Bank Climate Knowledge Portal, NCM, and the AMDAT disaster database, confirming the link between climate variability and extreme weather frequency. Finally, the projection graph on the right gives us a glimpse into the future. Based on the IPCC's AR6 report, the number of extreme heat days above 45 degrees could double by 2050, reaching nearly 80 days per year in central and eastern regions. Similarly, dust storm frequency, shown by the yellow line, is expected to rise by around 20%, particularly in the northern and southern deserts. In short, the data tell a clear story. Saudi Arabia's climate is becoming more volatile and hazardous. This is not a distant risk, it's happening right now. The challenge ahead is not to only cut emissions, but also to adapt, building cities, systems, and communities resilient enough to face those increasingly extreme conditions. So far, we've seen how Saudi Arabia is warming faster than the global average, and how extreme weather is already reshaping the country. Now, let's talk about what's being done and what still needs to happen to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. On the left panel, you can see the emission pathway chart titled Saudi Arabia's Emissions Reduction Pathway from 2020 to 2060. This graphic compares two futures, one under business as usual, where emissions continue to rise above 900 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2060, and another under the Saudi Green Initiative mitigation scenario, where emissions gradually fall towards net zero by 2060. These numbers are based on verified national data from the Saudi Green Initiative 2024, the UNFCCC 2021, and projections from CAPSARC and Al Sinan in 2023. The key milestone shown here for 2030 is a reduction of about 278 million tons of CO2 each year, mainly through renewable energy, carbon capture, and energy efficiency measures. But as the graph shows, reaching net zero is not automatic. The green line represents an ambitious transformation of Saudi Arabia's energy and industrial system. Without these efforts, emissions would continue to grow, following the gray line of the business as usual scenario. Now, on the right side, the mitigation and adaptation strategies infographic illustrates the two pillars of Saudi Arabia's climate action. On the left half of the diagram in green, you can see the mitigation strategies, expanding renewable energy such as solar and wind, advancing the circular carbon economy through carbon capture and reuse, improving energy efficiency and promoting sustainable transport, and on the right half in blue are the adaptation strategies, strengthening water management, including desalination and reuse, building urban resilience against floods and extreme heat, and promoting ecosystem restoration, such as tree planting and desert greening under the Saudi Green Initiative. Together, these two approaches, mitigation and adaptations, form a comprehensive national response to climate change. The country's success in avoiding the worst impacts will depend on how well it balances both, cutting emissions while building resilience to the changes already underway. In short, Saudi Arabia's climate strategy is no longer about protecting the economy, it's about protecting the future and its people and its environment. When we talk about climate change in Saudi Arabia, we're not just addressing an environmental issue, we are looking at a profound economic redefinition of the kingdom's future. For nearly a century, oil has been the foundation of Saudi prosperity, generating over 80% of government's revenue and shaping every aspect of national development. But this dependence also creates vulnerability. As shown in the left panel, in the bar chart Saudi Arabia's oil revenues versus GDP composition from 2010 to 2024 illustrates a slow but noticeable diversification. In 2010, nearly 90% of Saudi government income came from oil. By 2024, this figure had declined to roughly 70%, according to the IMF and World Bank. This progress, while significant, underscores a deeper paradox. Even as Vision 2030 advances non-oil industries such as tourism, technology, and logistics, the oil sector continues to finance the very transformation that seeks to replace it. The challenge is that the global energy landscape is changing faster than ever. The IMF warns that global decarbonization could cut fossil fuel demand by 40 to 60% by 2050. Leading to potential revenue losses in the hundreds of billions. For Saudi Arabia, such a decline is not merely fiscal. It threatens the stability of jobs, subsidizes, and the national budget model itself. In response, petroleum giants like Aramco are promoting the circular carbon economy or CCE. This framework seeks to reduce, reuse, and recycle and remove carbon through advanced technology like carbon capture and storage. It's not an innovative way to keep hydrocarbons relevant in a decarbonization world. Yet, as analysts from CAPSARC 2023 and IRENA 2024 emphasize, the CCE can only delay, not replace, the need for structural diversification. The real economic transformation is now emerging through green investment and innovation hubs, as shown on the map at the right. Projections like NEOM, the Red Sea development, Oidiva, and Dumat Al Jandal wind farm represent more than infrastructure. They symbolize a shift in economic logic, from dependence on oil to growth through clean energy, sustainable tourism, and digital industries. According to IRENA 2024, these projects could generate more than 750,000 green jobs by 2030, and together they illustrate a vision of post oil prosperity. Still, this is not an easy transformation. The oil sector remains the financial engine behind Saudi Arabia's modernization, even as its dominance is slowly challenged. As the World Bank 2024 concludes, the real cost of inaction will not be measured in decrease but in lost competitiveness. In the end, Saudi Arabia's climate economy is defined by a tension between legacy and innovation, between the stability of oil wealth and the urgency of transformation. The country's ability to turn that tension into opportunity will determine not just its climate future, but its place in the global economy. Let's end by looking at the politics behind climate action in Saudi Arabia, because what ultimately shapes outcomes is not only technology or economics, it's power, interest, and narrative. I'll make 3 points. First, the domestic clash of mandates. Saudi climate policy sits at the intersection of several powerful actors with different incentives. The Ministry of Energy and Saudi Aramco prioritize energy security, export revenue, and the circular carbon economy. That is, reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove carbon so hydrocarbons remain viable. The Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture and the Vision 2030 CHI leadership emphasize diversification, renewable wild out, adaptation, and international credibility. None of these goals are legitimate, but the pace and sequence of the transition create friction. How fast to move, who pays, and which technologies get privilege. The result is periodic policy incoherence and a slower implementation that plans on paper would suggest. Second, the external arena. OPEC plus scopes and major power diplomacy. Internationally, the kingdom plays a balancing game. Within OPEC, it defends coordinated production to stabilize markets, while in the UNFCCC, it presents its NDC and the Saudi Green Initiative as evidence of responsible leadership. At COP28, for example, Saudi Arabia supported the final deal but stressed flexibility, arguing that pathways must reflect national circumstances and technology choices, not a one-size-fits-all fossil phase-out. In parallel, partnership with Western investors on renewables coexist with energy cooperation with Asian partners. The dual posture is often criticized as contradictory. Diplomatically, it's a strategy to preserve market influences while buying time to scale domestic transition. Third, the battle of narratives. Inside out Inside and outside the country, climate debates are framed in ways that either accelerate or delay action. One narrative foregrounds risk, heat, water stress, floods, and dust, arguing for faster adaptation and renewables. Other underscores opportunity cost, jobs, competitiveness, and local content from green industries. A third stress sovereignty, that the kingdom should choose its own pathway, including CCUs and CCE, without external pressure. Real progress happens when these narratives are reconciled. Transition is faster where risks are localized, opportunities are tangible, and sovereignty is respected. So, what does this mean? Politics will decide whether today's ambitions. 278 empty CO square meters annual reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2060 translate into delivered outcomes. The clash isn't science versus denial anymore, it's legacy versus transformation, and who sets the rules of that transformation. The task ahead is to align ministries, finance, and industry behind a single implementation calendar, pair CCE with large scale renewables, and keep diplomacy credible by showing year and year domestic results.